in Chicago. I hope it's beautiful wherever you are. I'm going to do a carne asada dinner, something that I can throw together really fast, and I'll show you how to sort of maneuver through that. And I think you'll like this. We're going to use skirt steak for it. There's many different cuts of beef that you could use for it, but I'm going to use skirt steak because I wanted to show you how you clean skirt steak. Last time I used it, I didn't clean it for you at all. It already was cleaned completely. So I'm going to start by making this marinade here. Well, the first thing I got to do is to soften this garlic. Now this could be done dry heat on a ungreased skillet, or I'm going to show you the really super fast way to do it. That would take about 15 minutes or so. And then I'm going to show you the other way, which I've done many times here, and that's to put it into the microwave. Now you notice that I cut a little slit in the side of each one of those pieces of garlic, but I didn't peel them. Then put them into water, stuck them in the microwave. They'll go for 1 minute in the microwave, and that will blanch the garlic, basically. The reason for the slit in the side of it is because they can blow up. They can just pop, and then they'll just pop water all over your microwave. So to avoid any of that, I cut the little slit in the side of it. And then I have rolled these big limes around on the countertop. That's what I was doing when we started all of this. I rolled them around just to break up the interior of them. That makes them way easier to juice. And then I'm going to I need about a quarter of a cup to make this marinade here. These are pretty juicy limes, and I almost got the quarter of a cup now out of one. Actually need to do something more because I'm not quite there. So one more half of it here, and that'll give us what we're looking for. Okay, so we'll get rid of those guys over there. Let's get that garlic out of the microwave. It is very steamy and very hot, so I'm going to use my towel to pick it up here. And then just with the tip of my knife, I'm going to get them out of here and onto the cutting board so that they can start to cool down a little bit while we get all the rest of the ingredients together here for the dressing. So it's a quarter of a cup of lime juice and a quarter of a cup of olive oil is what I'm using. You could use vegetable oil for this if that's to suit you. I'll need a teaspoon. Remember, I'm going to this is the marinade, so it's got to be salty. And I am going to put about a teaspoon of that salt in there. A couple of teaspoons of Mexican oregano will go in there, and I'm going to rub it between my palms like that, so that I can crush it. This is bought at a Mexican grocery store where you get the whole leaf Mexican oregano. Just remember, you can use Mediterranean oregano. It's a completely different plant. This is in the verbena family. And I'll set that right over there. And then I need about a half a teaspoon or so of black pepper. I like a lot of black pepper, and I love to crush it right before I use it, so I always keep a mortar right beside a molcajete, right beside my cooking area, so that I can crush black pepper. And I also like it pretty coarse too, because I like the taste and the feel of pieces of black pepper in my marinade. So I will set those guys down there. Now we've got to put the garlic in there. I always start by cutting off that little root end of them so that they can just pop right out of the papery skin there. That one's not popping right out, but there it does come. Okay, and then these guys look like they've already popped out, so we'll just pull them out, keeping the skin on the other side. So that goes really fast. And you could imagine if you were working with raw garlic in this, it's going to be much punchier. So that's why I can put a fair amount of garlic in this. I'm going to run everything through the blender. You could do this in a food processor if you wish. Everything else is in this measuring cup here. And then I just want to puree that garlic into it. So we don't start on high, we start on low like that instead of on high, and then we will bring it up to a higher speed. And that's really all it's going to take, because remember that garlic is very soft already in the blanching process. Okay, so I'm going to set this guy over here and pour out a little of this marinade, because I like to put marinade on twice. I know that that's not super common, but I'm going to put some more over here that I can just work with later on. We're going to leave the rest of it just in this blender jar so that I can come back to it when we have the meat all ready. But let's go next to making this guacamole to go along with it. Carne asada guacamole, to me, that is absolutely a lovely combination. I like to smear a little of the guacamole on my steak. So if you're like me, you're going to welcome this guacamole, cutting around the pit, of course, and then the two sides pulled apart. I'm making just 2 avocados worth here, and I have a little spoon someplace down in here that I can use to scoop the avocado out of the flesh. Now this is going to be a slightly different kind of guacamole than what you may have had before and what I've made for you. I've done a couple of different guacamoles. That really classic guacamole, which is made with basically the ingredients of pico de gallo, tomato, onion, cilantro, and green chili. Then I made one that was really super fast that uses a salsa verde as the base of it, which is one of my very favorites. And this one's going to be just a tiny bit different, because we're going to marry the flavors of the marinade into this avocado. So remember, we've got Mexican oregano. That's going to be a predominant flavor here. A little bit of olive oil, which will be very interesting and make it a little bit more luscious. And of course, the lime juice that we all expect to find in here. And some black pepper, which doesn't typically go into a guacamole. Okay, so I'm going to put that in there. I want to add a little something extra to it. So I'm going to put some tomato in it. I pulled out a tomato because we have these really great tomatoes here in the Chicagoland area, the ones that are grown by Mighty Vine, and they taste like real tomatoes. They don't taste like winter tomatoes. So I'm going to cut down across this into slices, and then I'm going to cut the slices into strips. I think I'm going to have to do these one at a time because it'll go faster. And then cut across the strips like that so that we can have a nice dice out of it. Now, you don't have to put this tomato in if you don't want to. Or if you're working with salsa verde for this preparation, you could mix a little bit of the salsa verde into the guacamole, and that will be very much like that green one that I have made with you guys before. So you have lots of different options here, or you could make it just seasoned mashed avocado with that flavoring of that dressing in it. But I'm going to do half of the tomato here, put that in. I think that'll be just about the right amount for this. But of course, when it comes to guacamole, it's all up to you. Whatever you like, whatever suits your fancy in terms of the proportion of ingredients is what you should go for. I'm using the big old-fashioned potato masher. This is what we use in our restaurant to mash the avocado and to make good guacamole, because you can just do a few passes through and it's chunky guacamole already. Okay, so we're ready with this one. Now, of course, I do have to give this guy a little taste, but I don't see my tasting spoons anywhere near here. So I'm going to show you the way that it's done in most Mexican homes and professional kitchens as well. I can tell you right away, this is not going to have quite enough salt in it from that little bit of marinade that I put in there. But oftentimes what people do in Mexican homes and kitchens is to put it right on the back of their hand like that, and then so it came out good. It's got the right amount of acid. That lovely olive oil is really delicious in there. So Okay, now we're going to set this aside and we're going to come back to it at the very end, but I need to move on now to the meat and the accompaniment to the meat, which is going to be some, I'm going to call them Frijoles Borrachos because they are, they have bacon in them and beer and a little bit of cilantro, which reminds me, I do need to chop up a little bit of cilantro before we go on further with this. My spoons were just delivered to me. So it's wonderful that my wife is here in the room and she could hear my moment of need and come to my aid there. Okay, so I've got some cilantro here that I'm going to chop up using the sort of traditional method for doing that. I'll just put this side to the side here because I think this will probably be enough. Looks like I've got a few of the pieces that I have already pulled the tops off of, which is common in my house because I'm always reaching in and grabbing the tops. So I'm going to pull the stems off of those, get those into the compost bowl over here, and then I'm going to bunch everything up and then tuck the top part under like that. And then we'll go into the thin slicing, the chiffonade of cilantro. Now, you don't have to put any of this into that guacamole because the herb that is most predominant in its flavor will be the Mexican oregano, making it quite distinctive. Okay, we've got that much there. But I'm going to put just a little tiny bit of it into the guacamole. I'm just going to sprinkle it on top. I'll mix it in a little bit later. And then the rest of this, I'm going to set to the side to go into the beans. I'm going to make this really classic northern style version of a frijoles charros that is very common right up along the U.S. border, made with pinto beans. And I'm going to turn it into that borracho style by putting beer in it as well. So the first thing that goes into I have a pan already heating over here, is going to be some bacon. And I'm going to let this cook over about a medium heat here until all of the fat has rendered out of it, and then come back to it and add the beans. I'm just using canned beans here for it today. Stir it around just to start to break up the pieces that are sticking together. That was chopped bacon. And by the way, I put 3 pieces. You could get away with a couple of pieces of bacon here, but I put 3 pieces in here because I like lots of bacon. I like the flavor of it. So, and I cut it into about 1/2 inch pieces here. Now, while that is rendering and finishing, we're not going to get through the whole thing here, but I'm going to start working on this meat with you. So I've gotten everything else pretty much out of the way. So it's time now to talk about skirt steak. And last time I brought you skirt steak that was completely cleaned. But this is what skirt steak it looks like if you buy it uncleaned. It has a sheath on both sides. Remember, this is outer skirt steak, so it's the thicker one and the most tender and clearly the most beefy tasting one of all. Okay, so we've got that. I'm going to rinse off my hands and put on gloves to do that with because I'm going to be going back and forth between a couple of different things. Come over here and take a look at the bacon. It's starting to brown now, so it's going to be just about the right amount, and the fat has mostly rendered out of it. I had a hot pan to start with, so that helped to get this whole process going, but you see it's beautifully browned. And so I'm going to put these 2 cans of beans in here. Now I put them in with all of their juice because I want that juice. And then I'm going to add to it a little bit of beer. So I decided to bring this Victoria because I like the flavor of it. It's not quite as hoppy as, say, the Bohemia, which is another one of my favorites, but especially during the summer, I love drinking Victoria, so I'm going to put about a 1/2 cup or so of it in there, or a little more than that. I'm going to put almost a cup of it in there and let that just simmer away as our accompaniment to go with this. So we'll set the rest of it over there, and then I'm going to go into these gloves to start working on this beef. So as I was saying before, it comes with a sheath on it. And this is the diaphragm muscle. There are 2 of these in every steer, and that's all, making it either one of the most expensive cuts or something that people think is just a sort of throwaway cut, which is what it used to be like 30 years ago or so. Everybody just threw away the skirt steak, and then it started getting really popular, and now it's one of the most expensive of the cuts that you can find out there, which I don't mind because I've always thought it was the most beefy tasting cut of all. Okay, so let's look at this sheath here that's on the outside of it. And first thing that you have to do is just to pull that off. And it will be sticky on the sides, so you'll have to like tear it from the sides up there like that. And then come around and get it off of the other side there. And you'll notice all of this fat. So then that fat has to come off. By the way, you can, if you're a person that is into things like rendering fat, this is great fat to render. It will give you tallow. It's a fairly strong flavored beef fat, but it's really, really delicious. And then let's flip this around so that you can see this side of it. There's a little bit of that sticky membrane, covering membrane on there. So we'll pull that off. And then the next thing that I'm going to do is to cut this silver skin off. Now, I know it's there. You probably can't really see it very well, but if I take some of the fat off of it, here, right underneath it, you will see that there's this sort of silvery skin. Now, that silvery skin is super, super tough. So you just put your knife blade underneath it and cut it like that, and then like that, and you have it all trimmed off. So I usually do it when I'm working with a skirt steak like this. I don't usually take the fat off. I just know the silver skin is there, and I will just go underneath the fat and take the silver skin and the fat off at the same time. So we'll cut like this. Most of you will be buying your skirt steaks completely cleaned at the market, but it is really important to know that the difference between an outer skirt steak, which is fatter and tenderer, and an inner skirt steak, which tends to be much tougher and not quite as beefy flavor, is very important. So you need to ask the butchers if it is an outer skirt steak or an inner skirt steak and hope that they will be able to answer. They sometimes aren't able to answer that. Other side looks just exactly the same. I'm going to pull off the membrane that covers it. And then after I get that part off, I will start trimming excess fat. Now, this side will not have very much of the silver skin, so I'm really just looking to take off this top layer of fat here. I don't like to take it all off because I really like the flavor of it as it renders and bastes the steak. So I don't want it to be completely clean here, but just any big chunks that I see, I will take off. Now, what I want you to really notice here, there's a little bit of silver skin on that side, and you can see there's none now. What I really want you to see here is the striations in the meat, because this is what sets skirt steak apart from pretty much all other steaks. It's what we would call an open textured steak. So you can see these lines running through it. That's very important for you to notice, because when you serve it, you have to tell your guests that they have to cut across. If they cut this way through it, which is what most people would sort of logically think to do, they will get long strings in their mouth and it won't be a pleasant thing. You have to cut across those large striations to make it a really delectable and delicious experience. Okay, I've cleaned it up pretty much now, I think, here. So I'm just going to cut this thing. I'm going to cut this last little piece off here. So I have 2 beautiful skirt steaks. Look at that. They just look great. At our restaurants, we get our meat from Creekstone for a number of reasons. Mostly it's the quality of the meat and the way that they butcher, and the way that they slaughter and butcher, and it's a humane way of doing things. So I've got these 2 here. I'm going to put them into this dish here, and while I still have my gloves on, I'm going to just coat them with some of this marinade. Now this is a marinade that is a topical marinade. It might be best to let these sit for a little while, but you don't want to let them sit for so long that that acid in the dressing actually pickles the meat and takes the redness out of it. So like in our restaurant, what we do when we're working with skirt steak, we don't marinate it at all. We do a quick topical marinade right when the order comes into the kitchen, and then we put more marinade on after the meat is cooked. That's why I separated that little bit out over there. Okay, so I'm going to get this guy out over here, and let's talk about working with the, okay, let's talk about how you're really going to do this, okay? Because you're probably going to either light a gas grill or a charcoal fire. So if it's a charcoal fire, I always start 20 to 30 minutes ahead. And for this, you kind of want a really deep bed of coals. And you burn them until they're all covered with white ash and still quite hot. Now, if you're only doing a couple of steaks, then what I do is build a little pile of charcoal in one place that's going to give me that deep, thick bed. And then I don't have to worry about like covering the whole thing with charcoal, not wasting stuff if I'm just going to cook a couple of steaks or a couple of chicken breasts. So for this, many of you will probably be using a gas grill. So my suggestion with that is to get it to medium high. Don't go all the way to high, but go to medium high, I think is the best temperature to cook skirt steak at. Here, of course, I'm using this grill pan, my infamous I've used so much. So I'm going to just get a lot of that marinade on it and then pick it up, let excess fall off. And if you are doing this in a grill pan in your house, it is super important to disarm your smoke detector, okay? I cannot emphasize that enough, because you're going to create that kind of smoke. I don't have a smoke detector in here, thank goodness, because I don't have a hood over this part of the kitchen. We have the hood over that stove over there. Okay, setting this aside now, let's go back and let's look at these beans that we have going over here. I'm going to use this spoon to stir them. Now they look like they're doing really well. I'm going to turn up the temperature a little bit higher so that they can reduce a tiny bit. And at this point in the preparation, I'm going to add a little pickled jalapeno. Now this isn't absolutely necessary. I just like the tanginess of it and the tiny little bit of heat that it adds. This would just be something that you would probably buy at the grocery. I always keep some pickled jalapenos in my refrigerator at home because they'll last forever, and I can just pull one out and chop it up and add, even if I don't have any fresh chilies to add, but being mindful of the fact that these are going to add a fair amount of tanginess or vinegar to whatever you put them in. So we'll let that continue to simmer over there. Now let's go back to our guacamole and start to set up our plate here for this. We'll go back to guacamole. So let's remember what we've got going in here. We have some olive oil in there and Mexican oregano that are going to set this apart. Aside from that, it's garlic and lime juice and salt and that little bit of tomato and cilantro. So I'm going to put a big spoonful of this on the plate like that. I'm kind of just making enough stuff here for a couple of people. A little bit of chopped cilantro for beauty over the top of it. Let's look over here at these steaks and see how they're doing now. So they have that really beautiful grill mark on them. Now, while that is on its second side there, let's talk about alternatives if skirt steak is not your thing. My second choice always is ribeye for this, but for standard making of carne asada, it's not often this really huge chunk of meat. It's often fairly thin. something that you can put this delicious topical marinade on, and it's going to really taste of that marinade. So where you might think of a beautiful ribeye steak being an inch or an inch and a quarter thick, for this one we're talking like ½ inch thick. And if you go into a Mexican grocery store and go back to the butcher, you will see that a lot of meat is cut in that sort of thinness. So you can either sear it on a griddle, a la plancha they would call it, or you can grill it, and it will be super delicious just done that way. And you can get that flavor of, it's more ratio of marinade to meat, okay? If you don't want to use that, of course, a New York strip could be used, or you can move into the less tender cuts, the things that are like from the round, okay? The sirloins and the rounds, and those oftentimes will come fairly and they're thinly cut. But for me, they don't have as beefy of a flavor. So that's why I would lean more towards some of those other cuts. Now, there is such a thing as steak, okay? And it is one of these cuts that you just don't see very much. It's a little chewy, but my goodness, is it delicious in its flavor. So think about chuck steak sometime because it's a value and a really delicious thing. And yeah, it might exercise your jaw muscles just a little bit, but that's all okay. So now we're ready to start serving here. I will go back to this. You can see that I laid this on here in such a way that the grill marks are going in the same way as this. So what I often suggest to people is that when you're serving skirt steak, don't serve the whole piece like this, because the first thing your guests have to do is to cut it in half, okay? And then they can cut across it, because they can't cut that whole thing, certainly with even a steak knife at a table. So let's serve the beans. We're done there. I do think, now that I have my handy tasty spoons here. The nice thing about canned beans is that they usually, unless you buy the no salt version, they come already pre-seasoned. I added a fair amount of beer to that, so it's going to take just a touch of salt to it. Just stir that up, and all that lovely porkiness. Oh, by the way, I meant to say to you that this can also be made with chorizo, if that's your thing. If you would like to have chorizo, or if you have chorizo in hand and not bacon, then you can easily do that. Our frijoles borrachos with a little bit of pickled jalapenos in them. And always serve, for this type of preparation, this northern style preparation, you want to serve a lot of that bean broth on the top there. And then we'll come over here to the steak. Oh, I forgot to do this. So cilantro always goes into those northern style beans toward the end of the cooking. A really lovely thing. They don't cook with epazote typically there, but with cilantro added to the beans right at the end. And so then what I would want to do for the skirt steak is, before I serve it, this has gotten beautifully crusty here, is I would cut it in half widthwise that way. See how beautiful that is? And then I would serve it like this. And then just ask my guests to be sure to cut crosswise like this across it when they were eating it, because that will make it so much better for them. I have a little bit more of this marinade that I'm going to drizzle over the top of it. And I think we've got it finished there. A little salsa to serve on the side, whatever it is that suits your fancy. I have one that's made with 3 dried chilies, roasted garlic, and roasted tomatillo. It's one of our classics here at our restaurant. So it's smoky in here. It smells really good. I hope this encourages you to grill. That's all I'm thinking about right now, because it's such beautiful weather here in Chicago. I hope you enjoy this. Try it out, and I'll see you again next week.